All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Design, Build, Hunt podcast, which is presented by Whitetail Partners. We've got another good one for you today. We've got Tim Kaiser from Wisconsin, and we've got Scott Christison from not in Wisconsin, from Minnesota. And Scott, you're a recent client. You worked with Tim, and so over the last week or two, we've been working on getting some clients on the show because we want to hear about your experience. You know, we want to hear about what it was like working with Whitetail Partners, and hear what you've learned, because I think that asking our clients, hey, what did you learn from the process? What did you learn about habitat improvement? What have you learned about yourself during the process? Because I'm sure there's a lot of that too, as you can probably explain here in just a minute. I think people can go into habitat improvement on their property with eyes wide open. Whether they work with us or not, there's a ton they can pick up on from you guys. So Scott and Tim, welcome to the show today. Grateful you guys could come on. Tim, I'm going to start with you. How are you doing, man?
I'm doing well, Josh. It's a busy time of year. We were chatting, I know, right before we started, and it's just, you start working on client properties, and then you mix in your own stuff, and you at home, and you start falling behind on those to-do list items on your own property. So, trying to squeeze it all in. We got about a month and a half before hunting season, trying to get it all done. So busy as ever.
Yeah, love it. Well, Scott, welcome to the show. How are you doing this morning? You are not in the States today.
No, I'm not in the States. I'm north of the border, but doing well. Thanks for having me, guys. I really appreciate it. We're actually up in Lloydminster, Saskatchewan. So our middle daughter's getting married tomorrow. So up here helping out for the week and getting the site all prepped, and we're excited. It's going to be a fun day. So
that's awesome. Well, congratulations. That's very exciting. I appreciate you taking the time during that week, because I'm sure there are a lot of other things that you could be doing right now. But hey, who knows? This might be a welcome break from all the work.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it's actually a morning break. We've been kind of starting our days at noon and going out there, and from setting up the barn there on a cattle ranch. And it's going to be a wedding out in the valley. So it's between emails from my daughter Chelsea and Toby asking if we could help out with this. It's been definitely a busy week, but super fun. We've been enjoying it. So
good.
Get a chance to see the grandkids too. They're up here right now. So it's been fun.
Love it.
So, but yes, welcome break.
Yeah. Love it. Well, Scott, let's kick things off with you, man. Let's give you a little bit of time to introduce yourself and tell me about how you got into hunting. I see a shirt there that says "All Arrows Matter." Obviously,
yep.
You take this thing a little more seriously maybe than your average guy. So, how'd you get into hunting?
It's funny. Grew up in Saskatchewan, where everyone wants to come up here and deer hunt. So you would think that's where it would start. But grew up as a hockey player up here. Most everybody up here plays hockey. They teach you to all learn how to walk up here. They just teach you to skate first. So
love it.
Grew up playing hockey. So there wasn't a lot of time for hunting, and your off seasons were in the gym and working out and playing hockey and summer ice. And so I, focused on that. And then probably about 25 years ago, played some college hockey, played a little bit in the minors here and there, and worked with a company up here in Canada that ended up transferring me down to Fridley, Minnesota, of all places. Had no idea where I was going, and got down there, and it was kind of a fun thing. Just sort of, left the hockey career behind and didn't want to be because up here everybody's like, oh, you're Nick Christensen's son, or you're the hockey guy. So coming down to the States, I left that all behind. Didn't even bring the hockey bag with, and just the guys I all worked with were hunters, and grew up shooting guns and that kind of thing. And so we just started bird hunting, which led to duck hunting, which led to pheasant hunting. And then all of a sudden, Minnesota, this thing called the Army of Orange, and everybody's like, you got to come deer hunting. I'm like, all right, well, I've deer hunted in Saskatchewan, just not avidly, just we did it because we had land. And got in with those guys, and the rest is history. Went and it's funny because growing up in Saskatchewan, you're used to being like, oh, well, that's a pretty clean shot at 600 yards. Because we're in wide open prairie, so you're not sliding in behind a bush to get close to a deer. You're waiting for it to come across a wheat field that you can watch your dog run across for 2 days. So when I got the first hunt I did in Minnesota was, great property, super excited, hung out with the boys, and then they put you in a tree stand and give you, you get your 270 there and you're shooting 80 yards. I'm like, okay, this is different. So that was my first year of hunting. And after that, it was off to the bow shop. One of the guys had a bow and I'm like, that looks cool. And the second I got my first bow, it was all over.
I love it. So
have not picked up a rifle for deer hunting since.
Really? So
day.
you went strictly with the bow, and that was all she wrote for you.
Yep, have not pulled the trigger on a deer rifle since 1999.
Wow. So tell me about that. Tell me about that bow hunting transition. Like, what is it about bow hunting specifically? Because I mean, we work with clients that do a little bit of everything. You know, some clients say, "Hey, we want to bow hunt only." Some clients are, "Hey, we're rifle only." Some are, "Hey, we do a mix." So what was it about archery hunting, and specifically, that kind of roped you in?
Honestly, I think it brought the athlete out in me. It was, you don't just sit in a stand and, you couldn't make the mistakes you could make with a rifle.
Right.
You scare a deer off and you still can take a shot at it at 100, 150 yards running across and make a pretty clean shot. It was just, everything had to go right, the conditions. So it just kind of brought me right back to that world of, getting ready for the game, prep, getting out there, executing correctly in order to get a win. And the transition was crazy. It just instantly brought me back into the competitiveness of a high level sport.
Yeah.
That was the best part of it for me, was just you had to have everything go right. And that's what I loved. And it's so up close and personal. The deer you're shooting are coming in at 20, 30 yards. You're seeing what you're shooting. You're not, I hunt with guys that are like, oh, I shot my first doe. And I'm like, no, that's a spike, because they had no clue. So I love the up close and personal of it. I love the fact that you have to practice on a regular basis, and things like that, where it came back to the same execution of playing at a high level for hockey. Everything has to go right for you to get a win. And that's what I loved about it. And there was a lot of losses when I started. So
yeah. it is tough, man. I was talking with a guy yesterday about, the ups and downs of archery hunting, and especially when you're just starting out, and then you've got this, and I know for me personally, it's like you've got this string of years where for me, it was a couple of years where like, it's just not happening. You're making bad shots, or you're taking bad shots, which those are two very different things. You're, just not able to seal the deal. It can be really, really tough. But tell me about how you went from hunter to aspiring landowner and then landowner, because that's a shift in itself, right? The guy that says, hey, I'm done hunting, on the club or on the lease or on the public land or whatever. I want a little piece of my own, and I want to tweak it to my liking and improve the habitat. That's a whole transition. So tell me how that happened.
Well, and it's funny how it kind of happened. I started just like probably everybody, hunting public land, going to somebody that you worked with that said, oh, I got a great place to deer hunt. So I did that for the first few years, and it was funny because a lot of times I never pulled the release never went off. The simple fact is I just didn't feel like it was a good shot. I erred on the other side of caution, where a lot of guys are like, let's get out and get something. It was tough on the ethical side to be like, all right, I'm going to let this fly. It should be good. So I did a lot of that hunting for the first few years. And then we moved probably 13, 14 years ago now. We moved up to Fergus Falls, where we are. And a neighbor of ours had, about 80 acres, and he had a really beautiful homestead area, old farmstead, transitioned from a river bottom to a cornfield or bean field, depending on what they're planting. And he was like, you know what? No one in our family hunts anymore. If you want it, go ahead. And then that was about 15 miles from where I live. And then a guy that lived on the lake with us said, I've got 80 acres, and if you want to come hunt with us anytime. So I was hanging stands there. So I had basically my own lease on either side of I could go 5 miles this way, 15 miles that way. I was in heaven. Then I instantly jumped into landowner mentality, even though it wasn't mine, but
right.
He was like, do what you want, because we don't do anything with it. So I was planting, cleaning out areas, putting in little food plots. And it's funny, just things that Tim has taught me that I didn't even know I was doing. But trails go down from the river, kind of block off a few here, so it'd come through where I wanted them. And we grew that property in 3 years to where I had our first booner on there. I think it was around 188 when my friend shot it next door.
Mm.
But so, and what happened was I made the mistake of, with trail cams, showing the guy who I had it from, who had given me the property. I'd showed him, and he was like, "Oh, those look awesome." And then that next year, he was like, "Hey, I think my grandsons are going to start hunting out there again." So 3 years of work down the drain. So that was transition to landowner. Wife and I talked about it, and I said, and I was also an avid hunter, but a completely awkwardly wrong hunter. Just passionate. So I was in the stand. Gosh, bow opener, you're out there. Didn't matter if it was 80 degrees and mosquitoes, but it was bow opener. And I sat in the same 2 stands every night. I was out there 5 nights a week, and because it was only 10 minutes from our house. So, I was doing a lot of that. And, then I talked to my wife and said, I want to get something for us. It's just ours. I said, I'm sick of setting these up. Everybody that I know is killing on the neighboring properties, and now I finally have a piece of paradise, and he wants it back. So I was just disappointed from doing the work. So we basically got in touch with a company in our local area that does hunting land. Was referred to him by my brother-in-law, and next thing you know, he was showing us properties, and they were 200 acres, 150 acres, and budget was an issue for us. We wanted to be able to pay cash and just do what we could afford, and we wanted it to be within a certain area. And so that became the transition. We were on vacation. Again, it comes full circle, which is kind of funny, but we were in Mexico, and I get a call from my Whitetail Habitat guy, and he's like, "Found the perfect property for you." He sent me pictures, all the deer sign, pheasants, turkeys, rabbits, river. It was, I'm like, "All right, let's put an offer in." So we put an offer in. He's like, "Well, they didn't take it, but if you offer this, they probably will." So we did that, and we ended up purchasing the property sight unseen while we were on vacation. Yeah, and then we got out
quickly.
Oh, what's that?
I said that escalated really quickly.
It did, and it was one of those things, and we kind of, like, we have some rental properties and some different houses, and we built some properties. So we've always learned in real estate, if you see what you want, jump on it, because if not, somebody else will. So we just made the decision and did that, and got there we came back from vacation, very much like the Habitat plan 20 years later, 15 years later. But we just got back from vacation, drove out there and took a walk, and I'm like, this is awesome. And then it narrowed off. It was different than what we thought it was based on the pictures, but we wanted a couple things. We wanted a place where we could build, but not be in the middle of our property or ruin the deer hunting. And we wanted a place where if we went out to hunt in the evening, wife and I could jump out after work and then still get back at a decent time. So it checked all the boxes for us. And it was funny because we just thought this will be a starter property, and we'll go from there, because we fix it up, we'll resell it, and we'll find something different. And it's just turned into a little piece of heaven. So I don't know that I will ever sell this property. My son and grandsons will probably be hunting on it, even if we end up getting something different at some point. But it's we've turned it into a love place and a place of passion for working out there. Like, the more time you put in, the more you want to be out there. So
Tim, I'm curious, can you tell me a little bit more about the property? Give me your perspective, as a Habitat consultant coming in and seeing his property, which you'd owned it for how long when Tim came?
That was our 4th season.
Okay.
When Tim came.
Okay. So yeah, Tim, what was your perception of the property, I guess, when you went out?
Yeah, I think, it's interesting to hear Scott's, first of all, say, they were first looking at properties that were larger. Because I think that's a good lesson for everybody is that sometimes larger doesn't necessarily mean better.
Right.
You find that piece that has all of the components that you want, or that you can change to fit what you like. That's more important. I'd rather have 25, 30 really good acres than 200 acres, but a lot of it is really, it's not huntable or it's not productive. So
right.
I think that's just a good, it's kind of a good lesson. And that's what I saw when I got out there is, there's no wasted space on the property. Everything is productive habitat, or it's going to fit into areas we can put food or hunt out of. So it was a cool property in that it had all of the pieces there already. It was just a matter of kind of putting the puzzle together.
Man, I love that. I love small properties that are like the right property. You know what I mean? There's just something about that. You find the guy that gets a deal on a property that, I've got a buddy who hunts on 5 acres, and we call it the perfect five, because in this 5 acres, he's got a trout stream, he's got a corner of an ag field, he's got ridge lines coming down, a nice valley running through it, and all this comes together on 5 acres. And they have good deer on their property every single year. They have good deer hunting, good turkey hunting, good trout fishing, and it's on 5 acres. It's like, yeah, it can be done. You've just got to find the right property, like you said, Tim, where it all kind of comes together. So I'm curious, can you tell me a little bit about some of the things that I guess initially drew you to the property? I know you said that it had like the home site and, did you say a river running through and a couple
Yep.
other things? What are some of the other things that like drew you to the property? Maybe when you first walked it and thought, okay, this is awesome, like you were saying, what were some of your favorite parts that stuck out?
Well, and it's funny because Tim kind of nailed it, but you don't know what you don't know. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
now after spending time with, Whitetail Partners and Tim and it's not just Tim, it's the group. Like talked with Jake and I talked with all the guys just randomly on and off, and the things you learn, had I known that going into this, I would have offered full asking the second I saw it. Because I didn't know. For me, it was what drew me to the property was I didn't have to worry about someone else telling me I couldn't hunt it. And I didn't have to worry about, having a place where I could park my vehicle when I went out and things like that. All the things you deal with when you're using someone else's stuff.
Right.
And so, but now looking at, and you had mentioned walking the property. We didn't. I got some trail cam pictures from my guy and a Google Earth picture and a few close up pictures of deer sign and trail, and and that's about it. But once we got there and walked it, a couple things that really stuck out was it was like you said, the perfect five. It was similar where, yeah, we had, and I thought rivers were the water, which is, I'm learning differently now, but we had water, which was important to us. But the biggest thing was we had bedding with ag on every side. We kind of had the only real tree line in the area. It's a lot of ag country. So, and then just as you'd mentioned, it doesn't necessarily mean that our 25 acres is the only thing that you're hunting. You're kind of realizing where they're coming from another 40 acres over, and that's still the only tree line rolling through our property. So we kind of have some pretty, direct 2 and 4 lane highways that go right through our property all the time. And the pictures, like the guy did a great job that sold it to us. There was a boatload of deer pictures, deer sign. And you guys have mentioned that in podcasts before I've listened to, where it's like, have good trail cam photos.
Right.
That was a big thing for us. We got to see that before we purchased versus just having, if we had just seen the land, we could have bought something and been in an area where there's no deer. And then one other thing that really drew it to us was because we had looked at another property that was 70 acres for close to the same price, but it was in a county where you had to be drawn for tags. I was like, I don't want to do all this work, drive an hour and 45 minutes to our 70-acre hunting place, and it already had a pole barn on it and everything, and then run into, but I can't hunt this season.
Right.
So this was an intensive harvest area. At the time, I think it was 4 does and a buck. So we knew that if we wanted to take families out hunting, we could. And everybody could have an opportunity and stuff. So those are kind of the key things that drew us, was location, and the actual fact that it fit our hunting needs. We're not big 4-wheelers. We have one, but we're not ripping through trails and doing that. We do that, in the local town we live in and things like that. So for us, it was primarily going to be a hunting, and it also had a ton of pheasants. So those are the 2 things that we're passionate about, is pheasant hunting. We got a couple dogs, and deer hunting. And so when I saw those 2 boxes, I mean, it could have had a plutonium mine next door. We were still in. So
I love that. So I'm curious then, what kind of, it sounds like a wonderful property. So what prompted you then, after a couple of years of hunting it, to reach out to Tim?
Not knowing what I didn't know, meaning I was hunting it terrible. But we had big deer on the property every year, and I had, what ended up prompting me, the short story of it is, we had a buck we called the candlestick buck. I'd seen him for all 4 years on trail cam from the time we bought the property, watched him grow up. I think he scored, in the high 170s. And I had him, I mean, he was so patterned. We had a stand kind of in a wrong spot, which again, that's why you hire companies like you guys. It was a great spot to get into and hunt. It was over a food plot. And I had him, that was the year we were working on the cabin. I spent so much time on the cabin Tim knows me well. If I have something on my brain that I want to get done, it's going to get done come hell or high water. And the cabin was the focus. So it was banging nails until I got done. I happened to get done the day before gun opener. So my first sit was during the first opening rifle day in Minnesota. Candlestick buck comes in 30 yards, 32 yards, 10 minutes before legal shooting time. And I'm more about an ethical shot, obviously, but it was one of those things where just wasn't enough light to get a pin on him to make that ethical shot. He was standing in a little bit of winter rye. I was just like, you know what? He'll be back at 1 o'clock, comes through every day. I'm like, didn't even think twice, drew down. I'm like, we're good. And then about 8:10, I hear 2 shots from next door. Text my buddy. I'm like, hey, you got one on the run? Because they were 2 pretty quick shots. He's like, no, we just shot 2 bucks. They came out of the corner of your property. So he texted us pictures, and then the first one was a candlestick buck, which was our target buck for 4 years, which I'd watched grow. So it was disheartening. And we're great friends. We have fantastic neighbors on all the property, which has been really good. We talk, we have let each other know what we're doing and things like that. In hindsight, I wish I would have let him know that was a target buck because he probably would have shot it. He's more of a farmsteader, meat hunter. His niece was up from Iowa, which is even more ironic. You have to, come from Iowa to shoot our trophy buck. But then I said, that's fine. I said, I got the old 8 on there, and it was a 6-year-old 8 that was starting to decline, but that was my secondary buck for the season. And he was like, oh, that's the one that walked out with it.
Oh.
So that was the end of our hunting season because those are really the 2 other than, I sat in case a rut buck came through. So that was when I talked to my wife and said, you know what, I want to get a hold of a habitat company and I want to figure out how we keep these things on our property because it's happened to me 2 different occasions now. And so that was really our trigger wasn't the property layout. I didn't think it was, but it was the fact that I was sick of people shooting the bucks that I'd been targeting, doing the work for to keep there all season until it got to be gun time. And then it seemed like all of a sudden when rut hit, they weren't necessarily staying just on our 25 acres. So that was our TSN turning point. I was like, we got to call somebody. Had no idea cost or anything else. We were just, I need someone's help because this is going to drive me to not hunt.
Right. Yeah, that's there's this priority then of, hey, we want to own these bucks daytime hours as much as we possibly can, especially during the fall. Okay. All right. Yeah.
And I'm a big deep diver on YouTube. So like if I see something I want to do, I'll figure out how to do it. And I'll look at 30, 40 different videos and kind of pick all the commonalities. And that's what I started to do. And I realized that's what got me into habitat, looking at the habitat piece. I'm like, there's guys saying, you can keep a buck on your property in daylight hours. You can grow a herd, you can do these things. And I was like, yeah, that's what we want to do. Right. So I had no idea what I was getting into, but that's what we wanted to do.
Well, let's jump into that piece then. So no idea what you were getting into. You told me the story before we jumped on. You're down at vacation down in Mexico and you're waiting and Tim sends you the report. I'm curious what surprised you about the report and I want to hear just kind of your initial feedback because I think some folks are often a little bit, just a touch overwhelmed by the amount of information.
Yeah, and I know it's a family-friendly podcast, so I can't tell you what my initial reaction was. But no, yeah, I opened up and again, it was like a kid at Christmas because Tim and I were texting, and I'm usually pretty good on vacation with not using my phone at all because I just detach and have a great time, but it was on my hip nonstop. And I was like, Tim's like, hey, I should be finishing up in the next day or 2 here. So it was like checking my phone, and all of a sudden he's like, hey, I just sent it over. I'm like, all right. So I up to the room, grab the laptop, open it up. And like I said earlier when we were chatting, I was just anticipating an email with kind of, here's some of the key things we need to do first. And I knew I was getting a detailed report, but I didn't understand how detailed or how large. So yeah, when I opened it and clicked on the PDF and started to scroll and hit the table of contents, I was like, all right, going to pour a coffee and we're going to go through this because I'm not just going to scan it. So yeah, I would say I was super excited, but also a little overwhelmed when I first saw it, just because again, it just continued to go to the next piece, the next piece, the next piece. But what I loved about it and what really excited me and made it accomplishable was everything was laid out in order of, based on what our priorities were. It was so detailed. So you could actually pick chunks of it to focus on that were the big hitters,
Yep.
and then add the little things in down the road. So once I read through the whole thing, and again, we're super detailed people. So like if Tim says do it this way, that's the way it's done. So the first thing when we got back home was my wife actually printed it all out in color, put it into a binder that says, Red Arrow Hunting Property. And we had like a hard copy of this thing so we could go through, mark it up, and not have to keep scrolling through on your phone to read stuff. So once we got it all laid out in front of us, it was pretty intuitive and kind of step by step.
Good. I'm curious, maybe, when you looked at the design, especially where you saw tweaks to the way you were hunting the property previously, what are some of the biggest takeaways or changes, or maybe something that surprised you?
Well, two things were the biggest. I had two really big takeaways. One was right from our initial consultation when Tim had asked for trail cam pictures. I had sent him, and again, you send all the cool bucks you have and all the stuff that are on your cameras. And we quickly noticed that it was a lot of me and how I was hunting, because I'd get up in the morning, go all the way around the property downwind, climb into that stand, and then at noon, once the bucks were gone, you got out of your stand, took the trail back to your cabin that was the shortest. And we noticed right away that every time there was a big buck on camera, a day or two later, there was me walking through the woods. And then a week later, that same buck was nocturnal. So that was one of my big takeaways, was that. And then the second thing was the trail system. Like when we opened that up and saw the layout, it just was like, it connected all the dots in a heartbeat. Like the second I saw it, I was like, I could envision where he had the stands, and it was very intuitive, but it was also very overwhelming because it's a small parcel. So, and I'm assuming you've seen the plan of this, Josh. If not, I'll send it to you. But it was comical because there's so many orange lines, yellow lines, that like the whole thing looked like my daughter finger painted it. Like there was color everywhere.
Yeah.
So initial thought was, boy, there's a lot of stuff we have to do.
Right.
But then as you zoom in and follow it on your app and Onyx, it all just kind of leads you to the next piece. So
right.
Those are kind of my two biggest takeaways, where I learned I had to hunt it differently. And the second thing was, if you actually follow each of the pieces of it, they all just kind of lead one to another. So
right. Tim, I want to hear from you about, you're walking this property, you're working on the design. What are maybe the top one or two biggest changes that you kind of knew immediately? Like, because it sounds like it was a property with great bones. Like all the pieces are there. Scott probably could have been successful, like hunting this property the same way he always was, maybe not seeing the success he wanted, but he could have killed some deer on it, right? And so I'm curious to hear, what are the changes that you made, or maybe the biggest things that you feel like needed to be tweaked?
Yeah, a lot of it lines up with what Scott said. So number one was just understanding how he's hunting the property now. And, that's a lot of what we do. Is we do the design part of it, but we're also helping coach the landowner on how they need to hunt the property for long-term success and for repeated hunts, right? So anybody can dive into the middle of the property and have one good day. But can we have good hunts from September to December and not really impact the deer movement with the property? So that was a priority right away, is just working on making sure he understood how to access different stands for different winds, making sure we're not bumping those core areas of the property and making the deer feel comfortable all the time. But I think the second part, and this kind of ties into what he talked about earlier with, hey, this deer was on my property and an hour later it's on the neighbor's. The property had the pieces, but when we have a small property, we need to really maximize the area to get the most out of it, to keep deer on the property as long as we can. So one of my big focuses was putting all the pieces of the property in the right order so that we could have this really nice long movement, maximize the distance of movement within the property. So hopefully that time that they're on their feet in daylight hours is on your property. So that was to me, that was my biggest thing when I left the property that day, is how can we maximize the length of deer travel through the property and keep them there when we want them there.
Right. Very good. Very, very good. Well, Scott, I want to hear, tell me about that process of implementing the plan. So you obviously get this big report. You've got a lot of work to do, but you are one of my favorite kinds of clients because you got the report and you got after it. And Tim was making the joke earlier. You basically live on the property at this point because even though your home is 50 miles away, you basically live there because you're out there all the time getting work done. So tell me about that implementation process.
Yeah. Well, and one thing before we talk about the implementation quick, one of the other things that's a huge value from you guys was walking the property. We'd had it for 4 years and I'd never been west of the creek.
Yeah.
Because in my brain, I'm like, oh, those are it's just all red osier and willows. And, who would ever go over there? When Tim walked us through, it was really educational when he said, let me show you where your buck was killed and how. So we walked the trail. He goes, came through here, and he walked into this bedding area that looked like a temple with rubs everywhere. He goes, he came back here. He goes, I'm guessing your neighbor shot him from this stand over here. And I was like, yep. And so that was where it was like the aha moment of, all right, like the second coming of Kaiser, he's here. Whatever you tell me to do, I'm in. So it made the implementation easy. So we literally flew in on a Sunday or flew back in on a Friday. Monday, I was on the property. And the first thing that was the most daunting was cutting trees, because we have a aspen plantation with some, I would say they're towards the end of their life, that they just didn't get logged because they couldn't get equipment over there. So where he had implemented the bedding area that we wanted to add, and I'm handy with a chainsaw, familiar with it, I've done it my whole life growing up where I grew up, so I wasn't scared of the tools. But when it's your property, you can't uncut a tree. So honestly, that was kind of my biggest hang up to start. But I got there and I called Tim, relocated it, marked everything off with ribbons, sent him pictures, said, okay, I'm going to start cutting, but we're good here. He's like, everything in there, you're good. I'm like, all right. So then I fired up the chainsaw, cut the first tree, got back with Tim. I'm like, okay, you're sure this is like everything in here, And then once I got the green light and felt comfortable, then it was go time. I think we cut probably 100 trees the first week, between an area that we had to do a buffer zone around the cabin. So those are some, and we're talking 40, 50, 60-foot tamaracks, probably 60-foot, 70-foot aspens. So we just got it done. And then within the first week, I think within 4 days, I sent him a picture of the bedding area with all the trails cut through it, cut all the logs out, made my paths, make sure my escapes looked right. And that was the most daunting piece. Once I got that done, then the bedding area connected to the trail, and rented a DR. My rental story, you told the story about always getting insurance, Josh. It's a great story, because I had their DR mower called the Billy Goat, which got me through the first probably 100 feet of trails before we blew the engine on that one, and took it back to the dealership. And then it was, chainsaw the rest, because the other one someone else had already blown the motor on. So our small town rental store had both Billy Goats out of order. But we basically cut in the bedding, and then I took my Onyx, followed the trail, walked through and ribboned everything that Tim had on there. And again, it's really close, but sometimes as you're walking, it really made sense where you could see and you'd be like, okay, well, right over here is where my stand is. This has to curve out a little bit like he had talked about. We just kind of walked it, the whole property again with the trails, ribboned it all, made a few small tweaks. And I called Tim to say, hey, it kind of looks like I should be here, not here. And I'd send him the screenshot. And he's like, yeah, that's kind of what we were talking about. Because the plan is very close. But, again, when you're walking it with your GPS and you're zoomed in, you might be off 10 feet one way or the other. But we did all the trail work first, so that I had the path around the entire property. And then it got really kind of an addiction and also easy where, okay, well, right here's the water hole. And water holes are tough. That was probably the toughest part. I dug the first one by hand because I have I bought a tractor and everything. So I have a tractor with a loader and brush cutter and all the tools I need. But when you get a 4-wheel drive tractor stuck in we're pretty wet. So I went in, dug the first scoop out, and then spent the rest of the day playing Gold Rush Alaska and backing myself out of a big mud hole I got stuck in. So that one got dug by hand. And then we went to put back in the tote the next day, 150-gallon tote, and it was full of water, the actual hole. So we had a natural water hole for the first month until it eventually dried up enough where I could go back and dig them in. It was great. It was the best shape I've been in my life. So if anybody's out here looking for a workout plan, I would suggest you just get a hold of Whitetail Partners and get a habitat plan, follow it. You don't have to go to the gym once.
There you go. Love it.
Josh, something that is really cool about what Scott said there is that's exactly how I remember it playing out. Is that first time that he was going to cut a single tree, he was so nervous to do it and wanted to make sure it was perfect. And I appreciated that. And I'm happy to talk people through that. But what I loved is as he got more confident with what he was doing in the plan, and then he would text me and say, hey, I think we should change this. Like, to me, that's the light bulb moment for a client, though, is when they tell me that they should change something. That's good to me because now they're taking ownership of the plan and they're understanding it. So it's like we go from seeing it on paper or on your screen and it makes sense to I'm on the property and I can still see the vision in my head and I'm going to just make those small adjustments. That's perfect. That's what I want to hear because Scott's out there every day and he knows it better than I do.
Right. I mean, I say that in every, so with a report, there'll be some videos, that kind of stuff. In every video that I send, I always say in the implementation priorities, I always say, I want you to own this plan. That's the number one thing I want my clients to do. Take the plan. Let's work back and forth if we need to tweak some things to make it fit your style and what you're looking for better. But ultimately, I want you to own it because it's those landowners that feel ownership of it who are more successful because they go in and they do the work. They go in and they implement what we need to. And, it's those owners who end up, having a better experience with their habitat work.
Well, you'd mentioned the video piece too. And I think that was probably the most educational part of the whole plan because, you can read a document, but you're going to read it different than Tim's going to read it, then my wife's going to read it, and everybody interprets it different. But it was really helpful when you were at a spot where you were trying to figure, the food plots were the big one because we only had one food plot and Tim added 3 other ones and they all intertwine and connect. And some are smaller, what you guys would call your kill plots or whatever, but they were just staging plots for us and places with, our licking branches and water holes. And, you could click on the video and he would walk you through that food plot piece and why it was there and what we recommend and when to plant. And so those are things that, it really is step by step. The videos were probably the biggest piece of it. So, and I know those take a lot of time to put together on the report, but they're invaluable as far as being a landowner and trying to do this on your own.
Yeah. I love that. Well, I want to hear this now. So based on your experience, based on getting a design, rethinking the way you hunt, implementing that design on the property, what's one piece of advice that you would give to a guy who, has a property, maybe it's equivalent to yours, maybe it's 100 acres, maybe, whatever that difference may be. What's one piece of advice you'd give to a guy to help him take his hunting to the next level this fall?
And again, I know people have different budget restrictions and things, and I thought you guys are more than affordable, so there was no issue with that. But I would get a hold of somebody from, and again, I've looked at other habitat companies. I had offers from the people we bought the property from. It was, they were going to come out and we'll show you how to hunt it. And I literally got like a piece of paper with a sketch of where I put everything, and it was on one sheet of paper. And I'm like, I'm not going to go cut up an investment to make that work. But I would get a hold of a consultant from one of your guys in your area and at least have them come through the property. Because even if you don't necessarily, have to change everything in your property, the experience you guys have from being on different properties and seeing different hunting, opportunities and different hunting, I guess, strategies from different areas, get somebody that's local to your area that understands it and just get a consultant at your property. It's made it so much more fun to have a hunting property because we'd go out there and sometimes you'd have great hunts and other days you'd go, just like you guys talk about, I'm going to, the DK stand because that's where we shoot deer. And it just isn't the case. You can really make your property hunt however you want it to, and you can really control where the deer go. But get a consultant out there. You've got an investment into your land already. It's no different than changing the oil on your car or rotating tires. I mean, you don't have to. You'll still have a car or a truck. But at the end of the day, it's going to give you a lot better experience, and it's going to serve you a lot longer having it maintained. And out of all the things we've done, the hunting cabin's cool. We have a walk-in cooler and a cleaning station we put out there and all the things. So it's a really nice hunting area. But the best investment we've done is with you guys. And that isn't just pumping your tires and trying to give you a plug, but it's made it so much more enjoyable for my wife and I to go out there because there's always something to do. And it's every time you do it, you're improving the property for the next time you go out. So, I mean, we planted 350 trees. It's been awesome. We're excited for the next 5 years just to see the property develop and change. So that'd be my biggest, if you're a landowner, get a consultant out there, call one of you guys, have them walk the property, even just call and have a conversation. That's how this started.
Right.
I actually got Jake, and he's like, oh, you're going to want to talk to Tim. But that was prior to him spending 45 minutes on the phone, asking a million questions about the property, saying, sounds like this is awesome. Great place. I'll get Tim to get a hold of you. You guys are going to love it. So just have the conversation and see where it goes from there. That'd be my biggest recommendation. It doesn't hurt to call and have a conversation.
That's right. That's exactly right. So what's next then? I mean, it sounds like you're pretty dialed in on getting this implemented. So what's next for the property and for your work out there?
Well, we, like I said, this is our 4th or 5th season in the property, and the river is usually 12 feet wide and about knee deep. Most seasons you can walk through with muck boots. Next on the property is we're going to go on a hunting expedition to find the beaver dam that's wherever it is downstream, because we've had so much rain this year. I could sell our hunting land as waterfront property. The 2 food plots we put in, the river is 200 feet on either side every time we get a rain. So unless rice is good for deer, we have to come up with a solution, because that's the only food plot I have an option for.
Wow.
Because you had mentioned you're not doing summer plots. We usually do a rotation of buckwheat on our main property, our main plot, and then just overseed into it. We couldn't do any summer stuff this year because we just couldn't get the water off. Lost some of the switch we had to plant due to flooding. And so next thing will be finishing up those areas, getting it dried out. And then I have a couple water holes that we just weren't able to dig in because of that. So I would say we're 95% done. The next thing is to kind of just pick a cutoff point to stop, because I would just keep going. And next thing you know, I'll be in December through hunting season still working on stuff. But we have a kind of a drop dead date here coming up in August where we're going to get out, get the plots in, cut all our lanes for the stands, because Tim had us hang. I think we got 6 new stands. I'm not moving that big hawk blind for now because it's been too wet to get a tractor in there, and I don't want to end up being upside down with the blind. So I think it's just going to sit for the year, and that'll be a tackle for next year. But just to get everything kind of dialed in on the final touches. And if we end up a couple water holes short, it's going to be that way until next year. And then I want to have Tim back out again next year and kind of walk through. And because once we get a season under our belt of hunting it, I think there's still going to, it's endless what you can do.
Right.
But
yeah,
and it's, and then the biggest thing is just, there's some things that, like the switchgrass that we did, Tim, on the whole west side between the food plots, or between our food plots and the neighboring land. We've got some hard rain washout, but for the most part, that's coming in well. So it'll just be touch-ups. I'll get it prepped and ready so we can do some frost seeding on that, and then kind of go through the same process again next spring. Give Tim a call and kind of show him everything we have and see how we can make it better. Because it's just, that's the one thing about this habitat. You don't just do it once, because heck, the bedding areas we cut in, half of them grown in already, or I had to go clean out stuff already. So
right.
It's an ongoing process, but if you love to hunt and if you love to work on stuff, it's an experience. And like I said, it's addicting. It's become my new, hockey consumed me for 20 years of my life. But this is definitely the next piece of the puzzle for sure.
Now, Scott, we got to add one more thing to your to-do list. Is you do actually have to hunt the property this fall, so you do have to stop the land management work for just a minute and go enjoy it. All right, I know you don't like to sit still, but I want to see you actually get in the stand too.
Yeah,
my wife is chuckling in the background here because she's on the exact same boat. She's like, "When are you going to actually get it done so you can just hunt?" But yeah, that won't be a challenge. We're already waiting for the first cold front, and I'm not normally I'd be out there in the stand for opener. I won't do that this year. We're gonna wait for our first cold front in October. We'll have them patterned, and hopefully it's a 2 or 3 day hunt this year, and then we'll start harvesting some does.
Man, I love that. I love that. Well, Scott, man, thank you for coming on the show. Best of luck to you moving forward. I'm excited to hear an update. Once you've got a season under your belt, I want to hear how the deer movement changed, what kind of success you've experienced. I want to hear how sad your neighbors were that none of your bucks came onto their property this year. I want to hear how happy you are that things worked out like you were looking for. So I appreciate you coming on. I hope you'll join us again to give us an update. Tim, thank you for your time as well, guys. I hope you both have a great day.